Hi, I just wanted to touch base with you about the Malaysian 370 and just give you some reasons, some logical arguments and rebuttals to some of their possibilities that they have circulated in the recent weeks. Um, First of all, we know that the 777 is a reliable jet, no history of problems with it. It was had enough gas for 8 hours of flight, and there was a very experienced pilot as the main pilot on that plane, and so that's what we know. Okay, so they have suggested that there could possibly be a fire that broke out in the cargo hold with a lithium battery or something of that nature. Okay, or maybe an electrical fire started somewhere in a wire. Okay, well, if that were the case, first of all, let's look at the cargo situation. If there was a fire that broke out in the cargo hold, why are they thinking that the pallets and tie downs that they found over a week ago could possibly be from the plane? How could it fly 7 or so hours without burning up the rest of the cargo hold? If a fire broke out in the cargo hold, it would have consumed flammable items that were, or consumable items that were back there. Okay, and if the fire is what, so if there was, so let's say there was an electrical or another fire that started and it overwhelmed the passengers and crew with carbon monoxide or smoke, and they all passed out after they're using up their 8 minutes of oxygen masks. Okay, well, if there was a fire, it wouldn't have incapacitated everybody all at the same time. There would have been people that were still, people are going to pass out at different levels depending on how close they are to the fire and if they got down on the floor and avoided the fumes or not. Secondly, they have oxygen masks that provide oxygen in case of decompression, and those are like 8 to 10 minutes worth of air. If there was a fire that broke out, they would have had 8 to 10 minutes of air. And they could have made a radio call. Okay. Okay, so then you say, well, what if it affected the radio, if all the electricity was burned up and such? Okay, if there was a fire and it consumed, and it incapacitated them after their 8 to 10 minutes of air was used up, so they couldn't make a call because the electrical systems were on fire as well. Do you really believe the plane would have flown another 7 hours south or southwest into the Indian Ocean before it fell into the water? I highly doubt it. If it was that bad that it incapacitated the passengers after 10 minutes and it had burned up the radio communications and everything, it wouldn't have been flying for 7 more hours before the plane blew up. Okay? So those are all the holes in that theory. All right, so let's say that the electrical systems were not working. They had problems with the electrical system or the generators or the battery or whatever, and so they had to turn off the ACARs and the transponder and everything, all the lights and whatever electrical they could, and they couldn't make a call. Again, if that was the case, autopilot wouldn't be working. If the because that's something that uses electricity, the autopilot wouldn't have been working, and it wouldn't have been flying that long before it crashed. Okay, let's say there was an EMP that hit the plane and rendered all their cell phones useless, and all their communication and whatnot, so that they weren't able to communicate or send a message, and they couldn't control anything on the plane. If an EMP hit, all the electricity would be out. In that case, the engines wouldn't even be running. because it takes electricity. Your battery, if your car battery is not connected to your engine's not going to work. So in that case, the engines would have ceased. They would have crashed long before the southern Indian Ocean. Again, they wouldn't have been able to fly for 7 hours past their turn. And if they had turned and an EMP hit 7 hours later, once they were already in the southern Indian Ocean, why were they there? Okay, it wasn't because the EMP or the electrical or the fire. All right, let's say a decompression happened. Let's say a door cracked, broke off, or a window broke, and so at in cruising altitude 30 to 35,000 feet, they had a breach in their compression, and the plane started to decompress, and so then eventually you'll run out of air and whatnot. Again, if they had a decompression issue, they could have lowered their altitude in the 8 to 10 minutes that they had their oxygen masks. The pilots would have put on the masks, lowered the plane to an altitude where there would still be enough oxygen in the air outside to provide to the passengers and crew, and they could have radioed a signal. Decompression has nothing to do with the electricity, so they could have sent a distress call. But again, there was no communication after that 117 acknowledgement of all right, good night, and then they turned off the transponder. So all the theories fly out the window. Okay, then another theory is, well, it was a suicide. Okay, well, if that was the case, yeah, if one of the pilots was planning on making a suicide mission, they would have to render the other pilot inoperable or dead, and so that would have had to have transpired after or before everything was shut off, and then it's possible that he could have set it on cruise control, and had it flying out towards the South Pacific Indian Ocean, and with even if he committed suicide in the cockpit, there was no pilots; it was just autopilot. Okay, but then and then he had rendered all the everything, like the transponder and the ACARS system, they weren't working, so nobody would be able to track them, and the plane would be on, it would be just on autopilot. However, if that was the case, don't you think that there would be some communication from one of the passengers? In that case, I believe they would have realized, hey, we're still over the ocean, we're not over land, and our flight is like now an hour, 2 hours past arrival time. So why are we still in the air? And don't you think they would have been sending text or cell phone calls or messages, or using their computers to, there were 20 smart guys on there, at least the engineers from Freescale, so I highly doubt that they would realize that they were not on the same, they would realize that they were on a different path, and they were past the point of arrival for their flight, but there was no communication from anybody. So even if it was, all right. And then also we know that at 2:15, so that's the holes in all those theories. And then a terrorist. Okay, well, if it was a terrorist act, most of all the passengers except 5, there were 5 Americans, and then all the rest were from Malaysia or Chinese. Who was the terrorist act against? The Chinese, the Malaysians? 5 Americans doesn't seem like a big loss. There were those 2 unknown guys that had stolen passports and paid with cash. But why fly the plane into the middle of nowhere and kill 5 Americans and Malaysians and Chinese? I don't know. Doesn't seem like it would benefit anybody or terrorize anybody, although the loss of the plane is significant with all those passengers on it, the lives of the people. But they didn't, what would be more beneficial is if they actually stole the plane to use it for a later purpose, and they kept those scientists, especially the ones with cloak technology that they were developing for their own country, and that would be more beneficial. So that's why I believe it's highly unlikely that it's it's in pieces in the ocean with all the passengers deceased. All right. Then it's strange that at 2:15 the Malaysian military, the country that owned the plane, detected it was in their radar when it flew over the Strait of Malacca, and it didn't pursue it. At 2:15 a.m. they saw it and it passed, and they didn't pursue it, and they didn't go after it, and they didn't even call to ask what it was doing or where it was intending to fly. I think that sounds sort of fishy to me, that they didn't try to communicate with the plane. And if they did try to communicate with the plane and it didn't respond, then don't you think that they would have sent one of their planes after it, or they would have reported it and said that it's a rogue plane? It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't add up, folks. All right, and then and how did it not? If the Malaysian military could detect it, why could not other, like our Diego Garcia, U.S. Air Force military base on the atoll at Diego Garcia in the southern Indian Ocean? How come they didn't detect it if Malaysia's military could detect it when it passed over or by? 5 to 6 hours later would have been close to enough for them to detect it, but no. And nowhere ever does the Malaysian government ever say they tried to communicate with the plane. I've never heard any reports where they've actually said we tried to communicate with it, or they tried to go after it or see where it was. It's just very fishy. All right, and then the debris is just, I think the debris trails are just made up. They've had so many different sightings and satellites that say they saw images, and like I said before, a couple of them were discounted as not being part of the plane. And now, since the 24th or so, we have had over 122 objects. Now it's like 200 objects that they can detect with their satellite images, but then they're not finding them when they're there. And they have so many ships and planes, and I know it's a rough area of the sea and such, but if they know where they are today, and then they send out a plane which can fly directly to that projected path of the debris, because it's like traveling like 50 to 100 kilometers a day, with the tides, it's breaking apart. First of all, after, oh my goodness, almost 3 weeks, would that debris still all be there in one area, 200 pieces in one area like that with one satellite picture? I find that hard to believe, because after almost 3 weeks, don't you think that a lot of that debris would be, if it's traveling 50 to 100 kilometers per day and in different paths and branching out and spreading out, don't you think it would be more sparse than one concentrated picture of 122 to 200 objects? It just sounds like one of their ships dumped a bunch of stuff into the ocean, if you ask me. And they know that they know that the debris is moving. If it's from the plane, it's moving in, it's moving out from its original location. And they know, supposedly, with the Inmarsat French satellite, or satellite detection system, that supposedly they know the path that the plane took. Okay, if they knew the path that the plane took, and they can pinpoint exact sections of the ocean that the plane took, the last ping that satellite system detected should be where they're looking for the black box from the plane. Not where the debris is up over here or over here, but they should be looking at their last transmission and just in a radius around there of where the plane would actually be, because the bulk of the plane is going to be in that location. Once it sinks, the engine and the black box, it's not going to be shifting like the floating debris. So why are they looking for the plane underwater over here or over there when they should be looking exactly where their last detection of the satellite, where the path of the plane? It just doesn't make sense. So those are all the gaps and holes in those theories, and post your comments on what you think. All right, blessings.